Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Garden Robinson, and I'm your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. These webinars are brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension, and a special welcome if you're joining us from a watch party. We have been celebrating a milestone in 2025. This is actually the 10th year we have done the series, and we're really glad you joined us today. We've reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, along with best practices for food entrepreneurs. We've archived all of the more than 100 webinars from the previous years, and the link is on the Field to Fork webinar page. The next slide shows the upcoming webinars. I hope you join me. I'll be your speaker, and we're going to go down the hall from where I am right now into the lab to do a live demo about making salsa, along with some regular content. The next slide shows our webinar controls. And because we have a lot of you on this webinar, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat box. So let's practice finding and using the chat box and ignore the Q&A box. Click to open the chat and type in your city and state and your current outdoor temperature. The next slide provides an acknowledgement as you work on that. I do have a special request. All of these programs have been sponsored in part with grant funding from the Agricultural Marketing Service of the USDA and the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. I will ask each one of you to complete the short online survey that will be emailed directly to you to your email right after we finish today. And as a thank you, we will continue to provide prizes to the lucky winners using random drawings. Be sure, though, to put your complete mailing address on the follow-up form, including your city, state, and zip code. And scroll down to today's date. Again, I welcome you to today's webinar, and I'm very pleased to introduce our popular speaker. Tom Kalb is an extension horticulturalist for North Dakota State University. He conducts gardening workshops, writes articles, and answers lots and lots of gardening questions. He coordinates the Spring Fever Garden Forums, the North Dakota Home Garden Variety Trials, and he's been very involved with the North Dakota Junior Master Gardener Program. Today, we are going to learn all about squash. So with that, Tom, it's all yours.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. And we're going to go through some of this stuff. All right. And Julie asked me to talk about squash because it's one of the most popular vegetables that are grown in North Dakota. And one question I always used to have about squash is, how the heck did they ever get the name of squash? And it actually comes from the Native Americans out east who calls these fruits a skuta squash, a skuta squash. And according to the Library of Congress, this means eaten raw. So those people out east, they didn't cook their squash, they ate it as a snack. How about that? And squash is a New World vegetable. It's developed here in the Americas and introduced to Europe later. Speaking of Native Americans, I think the most popular and historic gardener of North Dakota is Buffalo Bird Woman. And you can see her tilling her garden right here and in central North Dakota. And you can see squash there along the edge of the garden. And you can see that fence there going along the edge too. Squash was grown by Native Americans in North Dakota as one of the four sisters. The other sisters were maize and beans and sunflowers. So these four crops all complemented each other in the garden, and they also complement each other in the diet. And the one feature of the squash to the family was that it would crawl along the ground, and it would serve as a mulch that would help to smother weeds. And then also you see it's planted along the edge. And that's because those spiny vines of the squash are used to keep out the wildlife and the mischievous people from the garden. And The way the Hidatsa tribe, they would harvest the squash and then they would slice it and then they would put it through willow branches and then they would dry it out and then they would enjoy it all winter. And the Hidatsas, they boiled their squash. That's how they ate it. So I don't know. That's opposite of squash, I guess, unsquashed because it's not eaten raw. If you're interested in trying to grow a type of squash that the Native Americans in North Dakota grew in the past, I would recommend you try Lakota squash. Lakota is very beautiful, and every squash looks a little bit different, and it's a delicious winter squash. Another important squash for North Dakota is the buttercup squash with that gray belly button on it. North Dakota Ag College, we actually released buttercup squash to the world in 1930. So buttercup squash is loved all over the world, and it came right here from North Dakota about 100 years ago. So I'm going to talk about today two types of squash. Let me get my laser pointer going. We've got the summer squash and the winter squash. And so what's their difference? Summer squash has a thin and soft skin, and we harvest summer squash when it's immature. We don't want it to get too seedy. And also summer squash has a very short storage. So we harvest it early and we eat it quickly. We eat it in summer. No wonder it's called summer squash. Winter squash, on the other hand, it has a thick, hard skin, and we wait till it matures before we harvest it, and it stores a long time. Some winter squash can store for 6 months. So we let it harvest all the way till late in fall, and then we eat it in winter. That's why we call it winter squash. Okay, I'll highlight some of the main types of winter and summer squashes now, starting with acorn squash. The one nice thing about acorn, it's very early. It's the earliest to ripen of the winter squashes, and it's great for roasting. The other thing about winter squashes is some of them you can eat right away and they're sweet. Others, you need to store them for a month or two before they will really develop their best flavor. Acorn squash is one of them that you can eat right away. So this is one of the first ones that we can enjoy in late fall. Then again, that buttercup squash comes from North Dakota. People like this because it's a sweet squash and it has just the right mixture of flakiness and moisture as far as its texture goes. Butternut squash, that's famous because of its sweetness, and also it has more of a moist and smooth texture to it. Now, often I get the question, what's the best pumpkin to make pumpkin pies with? And the answer is, I would do what the number one company does, and the number one company is Libby's, and they make their 100% pure pumpkin filling out of butternut squash. So the FDA lets them get away with calling it pumpkins because there is no real clear difference between pumpkins and squashes. And so as long as the fruits have a golden flesh, the FDA lets them call it a pumpkin, but actually it's a butternut squash. So if I wanted to make a pumpkin pie, I would use a butternut or a buttercup squash. One of the trends we have now in different varieties and the modern varieties is for squashes to be smaller. And so there's baby butternut squashes that are very popular now. They only grow about 1 or 2 pounds and they can be used as single servings. Now, among the squashes that are declining are the opposites. These are those giant Hubbard squashes. And most people don't have 11 kids like my parents did. And so they really don't need a 20-pound Hubbard squash anymore. So that's on decline, that one. One that I encourage you to try is delicata squash. Delicata is it's the sweetest of the squashes, and you can eat it right away. You don't have to cure it. And also, when you cook it, you can eat the skin as well. Delicata is so sweet that it's sometimes called sweet potato squash. And so when people ask me, what's the best way to grow a sweet potato in North Dakota? I say, don't bother, because almost all people who try it get disappointed results. They have these little tiny roots that they develop. Instead, grow a delicata squash. It's early ripening and it's delicious. And perhaps the classic winter squash is a kabocha squash. This is from Japan, and this is gaining popularity big time in the United States now. They like it because it has a dry and flaky texture, plus it has a more of a complex sweetness to it that once you've tried it, you'll really like it. And Delica is the number one variety, or maybe Sweet Mama would be a good one that's done well in North Dakota here. Among the summer squashes, you got the yellow ones, like the straight necks, and these are so productive. They are just unbelievably, they just pump out the squash constantly. And then we got the crook necks. The thing about the summer squashes is that they're so productive. So quantity is never the problem. The problem is more like the quality. People aren't usually, most people are not really wowed by the flavor of summer squash. And so now the emphasis in the plant breeding world is trying to develop summer squash with flavor. And so here's a variety that's getting famous for its flavor, and that's Zephyr. It has a distinctive yellow squash with a green bottom. So I would encourage you to try this. Another summer squash is a patty pan squash, or sometimes called scallop squash. This also has quite the history in North Dakota. And here's an old publication from over 100 years ago, the North Dakota Farm Vegetable Garden. 100 years ago, North Dakota was one of the poorest states in the United States. The rest of the country is going through the roaring 20s, but we were going through very low farm prices and drought and, like the dust bowls and such. This was a very poor time, and there was literally hunger on the prairie. Here's an example of some of the beautiful homes back then with their natural landscaping. So the scientists at the North Dakota Ag College, with this poverty is going around, they're trying to find a crop that they could grow to help remedy hunger. And they found that, my gosh, for some reason, this summer squash grows amazing. And this could be the answer to solving hunger in North Dakota. Now, the problem that we had, and we did test this in our variety trials, it grows well. But I remember one of our testers, it's a minister from Logan County. He always grew his vegetables to share with the poor. But after he ate some of this white patty pan squash, he told me he thought it would be a sin to donate to the poor and make poor people eat it. It tasted so bad. So he would just take this squash to the county dump. That's how bad tasting it was. So this never really caught on in North Dakota for a good reason. It tasted terrible. Now there's a new patty pan squash out this year called Starship. It's reported to be very flavorful, but and you can test it with us. We've got a team of over 300 families that we work with every year, and you're welcome to join our team. And we'll see what happens. I'm kind of skeptical, but we'll see what happens as far as the flavor. At least it's beautiful. Okay, then we got zucchini, of course. That's our famous summer squash. And zucchini is the vegetable that nobody respects. They set it on the side in the corner, just please somebody take this away from me. You know, People abandon it on the park benches. But kids who aren't brainwashed, they like summer squash. It's kind of fun to grow zucchini. And this picture could have been me. This could have been me like about 60 years ago. Out on the family farm, we grew zucchini and sold it with other vegetables. And if you missed picking the zucchini at the right time, then the next time, 3, 4 days later, it became pretty big like this. And so what do you do with a big zucchini? Well, kids back then, we didn't have computers or anything like that, video games. So we made our own fun. So zucchini was a fun thing to play with. We could play baseball with zucchini. Here, throw me that tomato and I'll hit it with my zucchini. Or the other thing that we used to do is, zucchinis float. And so we would take a zucchini and then we would carve it out into like a canoe shape. And then we would put a mast on it. And then we'd go down to the lake, each one of us with our zucchini boats, and we'd have war games with it. Like we'd get the rocks and dirt balls, and I'd try to throw, cannonball rocks and try to destroy my brother's zucchini boat. So zucchini was great for fun. And then also, of course, there's that historic legend of Montana Maggie, and it's a true story that at one time a bear came to Maggie's garden, and Maggie had a dog, and Maggie's dog saw the bear, and the dog started barking real loud, like bark, 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 bark. And then Maggie's out in the kitchen. She goes, "What's all that racket outside?" So she goes outside on the deck, and she sees the bear herself. And Maggie's a tough pioneer woman. She doesn't back down. She yells at the bear, "Bear, you get out of here. You get out of my garden." And then the bear got mad. So the bear came charging at Maggie. Maggie scooting across her deck, trying to get into the kitchen, and she's trying to shut that kitchen door. And she gets it about halfway closed, but the bear's face is right there in front of hers. She can feel like that. She can feel that warm breath of the bear right face to face. And so she's holding her door with one hand, and what's she doing with the other hand, trying to find where's that weapon? Where's that weapon? And she found her weapon, a zucchini. And the zucchini, she bopped that bear, and the bear ran away scared. So people make fun of zucchini, but I have to say, I think it belongs in the Vegetable Hall of Fame because you can have it for nutrition, you can have it for recreation, and you can have this vegetable for protection. So what else do you want out of a vegetable? So all praise goes to the zucchini. Again, we test lots of squash varieties in our home garden variety trial program. All gardeners in North Dakota and nearby counties are welcome to participate in our trials. And there's our website there at the bottom. I encourage you to give it a look, and we're going to be sending out our catalog in a few days. From our research, we've done research for about over 15, 16, I think it's our 17th year now, working with hundreds of gardens every year. We've established a list of varieties that perform best for North Dakota, including a list of squash varieties that perform best. So you can go to our website and download our list of recommended varieties, and also where you can buy the varieties. That's important too. So let's just talk about that, because now's the time when we're getting our seeds. And I really encourage you, if you're really serious about having a great taste experience and a very productive garden, that you don't limit yourself to the seeds at a garden center. Seeds at a garden center, they'll have like maybe 5 varieties of squash, and a lot of the varieties are over 50 years old. They're not, a lot of them aren't hybrids and not especially productive. And so why would you limit yourself to that when you can buy one of the hundreds of varieties that are available? And so I always get seed catalogs, and this time of year, and I go through the seed catalogs. I want to tell you just about a few seed catalogs that I really encourage you to go ahead and request a free copy of them. The first one's from Johnny's Selected Seeds out in Maine. Johnny's has a famous breeding program for squash, and actually I just went through their catalog. They have 82 varieties of squash, 82 varieties that they're offering this year. And these are, for the most part, modern varieties that naturally resist diseases and give you unforgettable taste experiences. You can see here's their catalog. It's not, not super colorful, but another thing I like about Johnny's, doesn't, whether you get your seeds is up to you, but I recommend you get this catalog because it's a great information resource. And they have a section for every vegetable giving you advice on how to be successful in growing it in the north. So here's the close-up of their winter squash, and they'll tell you about, okay, here's how you transplant it. Here you can sow the seed directly. Here's the bugs to worry about. Here's the diseases. So this is very good information that is very helpful that will make you succeed as a gardener. So I would say get this catalog and just keep it as a resource. I also like for squash Harris Seed Company. They have a lot of varieties that are highly productive and resist diseases. If you like organic seeds, I encourage you to get to know about high mowing organic seeds. I think one problem with organic seed companies is they often limit themselves to heirloom varieties, varieties from like 60, 70 or older years older than now. And we've just made so much progress through science in developing superior varieties. So one thing I like about high mowing is they offer the modern superior varieties, but they grow the seeds organically. And then also, I think it's important to feature the seed company of North Dakota, Prairie Road Organic Seed. And these people, they have developed varieties that specifically grow well in North Dakota, and including one of their most famous is Uncle David's Dakota Dessert. Uncle David's Dakota Dessert Buttercup Squash. It's one of the finest tasting squashes you'll ever enjoy, and it grows well in North Dakota. Okay, when I select seeds of squash, I want this variety to mature early, and it's got to be 100 days or less if possible. It's got to taste great. I want it to resist diseases, most notably powdery mildew. That's our big problem for squash. I want the variety to be productive and grow well in North Dakota. Now, as far as sowing the seeds, you can either sow it directly in the field or you can grow it as transplants. For squash, most people sow it directly in the field, and we have to do it after the danger of frost. Squash seedlings cannot tolerate frost, so we got to wait till mid to late May. I always wait till late May because squash likes a warm soil temps in the 60s. And then these are general recommendations as far as sowing. Like summer squash, we sow the seeds about 6 inches apart and we thin to about 18 to 24 inches. And if you give them more space, they're easier to harvest from those plants. And in winter squash, we go about 6 to 12 inches apart with the seeds and we thin to a little bit more. And we'll thin it to about 18 inches for some of the varieties that have a small vine. We call that a bush vine, or maybe 36 inches per plant. And that would be for a variety that has a long vine and a large fruit. For transplants, okay, we're setting out the plants in late May. And so we're going to start the seeds no earlier than early May, no earlier than 3 weeks before transplanting, only 3 weeks. If you grow it longer than that indoors, it's going to be leggy. And squash does not transplant very easily. So you can plant them in a peat pot or a fairly large, it's like a 2-inch, we call them a 50 size plastic cell. It's like a big plastic cell. And put 2 seeds in the pot and you thin to the most vigorous one. And then we'll space our plants in the field later in late May. So don't start your seeds too early indoors. And I like to give them a little bit of warmth in the beginning too, like 70 degrees. So use a seed starter or potting soil mix. And also Don Kinsler gave a talk in this series just a couple weeks ago, focusing on seed starting. That's full of great information. If you want advice on seed starting, I encourage you to go to Don's presentation. Okay, I'll highlight just a couple things relative to squash though. And squash likes a warm start, so maybe a seed starter mat would be nice, a heating mat. And well, I like it to be in the 70s when I sow the seed. And then after it germinates, we can go more to room temperature. We want to give our seedlings lots of light. The quantity of light is important, not the quality. You don't have to waste your money on grow lights or fancy lighting systems. You can use fluorescent tubes or LED lights. That does just as well for seed starting. And be careful not to overwater. So these are tomatoes, granted, but I want to emphasize about the lights and the quantity of light. So let's say, here's my plant. And let's see, here's my lights, my tube of fluorescent lights. I'm going to drop my tubes as low as possible to the plants to get as much light, quantity of light as possible, and until it gets too warm. So I put my hand over the plants. If it's too warm, if it's uncomfortably warm for my hand, it's uncomfortably warm for the plant. And then I'll raise up the fluorescent tubes or LED tubes so the plants aren't uncomfortably warm. But again, quantity of light's important. And I see these plants, when I see plants reaching up like the spindly, they're not getting enough quantity of light. These guys aren't going to make it. These are examples of peat pots. And so it looks like they put in 2 seeds in each pot. Now, again, these are not squash seeds. It looks like these could be bean seeds, actually. I'm not sure, but the one thing I want to talk about this is that if we're going to thin to 1 plant per pot or 1 plant per cell, the way you thin is you cut. You don't want to pull it out. You don't want to pull out the plant, because if you pull out the weak plant, you're going to disturb the plant that remains. So instead of pulling out the weak plant, just get a scissors and cut it out. Just make a cut right near the base below the lowest cotyledon, and then, or the lowest false leaf, and that way you won't disturb the seedling that remains. Okay, so get a scissors and do that. Should you use treated seed? I would say treated seed is not as important for squash compared to most other vegetables, as long as you wait till late May to start. But if I was a commercial grower, I would definitely use treated seed because it gives me that extra protection against fungus diseases, and there's a few insect pests that damage seedlings as well. And today's coverings, you can see this is a film coating on some squash seed, and you see it's not a powdery mess of toxins. It's just a film, and so it doesn't really rub off on your hands or anything, so it's easy to handle and very useful. But in our variety trial program, we generally do not offer treated seed because I work with a lot of kids and I don't want them to plant seeds and pick their noses or whatever. So I think but if I was a grower, I would consider using treated seed. Should you mulch squash? I would say I rarely see squash mulched. I got an example here of cucumbers. And one of the biggest advantages of mulch is it warms the soil and accelerates the growth of the plant. So like I see here in this cucumber, I can see it's already blooming. And just right next door without the mulching, it's got to be 10 days behind schedule compared to what's happening over here. And so for cucumbers, um, I like using mulching, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, these heat-loving crops. Squash, I don't know if it's economical considering the cost of mulch. I don't know if it's economical to get to the market, let's say 10 days earlier than your neighbor, than the other farmer with your acorn squash. So usually we don't use mulching for squash, but you can if you want. But then the other thing is the vines will stretch out and you kind of lose some of the power of the mulch, some of the benefits of it. Okay, so the big disease of squash is powdery mildew. And so how do you solve that? It's so easy. Just buy a variety that resists powdery mildew. It's really that simple. Use a modern hybrid variety that resists powdery mildew. But also the watering comes into factor. Powdery mildew loves humid conditions. So it loves overhead irrigation. So if you wanted to grow a disease, you would use overhead irrigation all the time and get the leaves wet. And this picture reminds me of my first real job in my life. And I don't know if you remember your first job. Was it like, I don't know, working at a grocery store or McDonald's maybe, or babysitting? For me, I was a trained assassin. I was hired to kill plants. That was my job. I worked at a sunflower research place, And my job was to torture and kill sunflower plants. That was my job. And how'd I do that? I would try to spread disease and kill as many varieties as possible. And those sunflower plants, they feared me, I tell you. I could see their heads move when I walked across the field. And how to do it? I used overhead irrigation at night, and then I would sprinkle the fungus all over the place, and then the fungus just went wild. And so why did we do this? Because our goal was to hope to find one variety that I couldn't kill, one that resisted all the diseases. So if you want the proper way to water squash is don't do overhead irrigation. And if you irrigate in the morning so the leaves have a chance to dry off before night. And then also water deeply, not frequently. Why is that? Because if you the roots grow where the water is. If you water deep, the roots grow deep. Okay, and it's better not to water so frequently because you're more likely to get the leaves wet. Okay, so water deeply. Once a week is better than 5 times a week, for example. Okay, the big bug we worry about is squash vine borer, and that is an orangish moth that flies around our patch around the 4th of July, and it kind of makes a clicking noise when it flies, but usually you don't pay that much attention to it. But in early July, I always walk around my squash plants to see, like this moth, she wants to lay her eggs right at the base of my squash plants. So I look to see if there's any puncture marks there. If there are, I can spray an insecticide and kill the eggs before they hatch. But if you don't get to them, you'll see this caterpillar. And what happens is you'll see your vines are just wilting. And then you go look at the base of the plant and it's got these marks and it's all chewed up. And so what do you do about that? It's kind of a sad situation, but sometimes you can do an emergency surgery and save the plant. So you slit it open and you literally pull out this creamy caterpillar, and then of course immediately step on it and enjoy revenge, squishing and killing it. And then what happens? Sometimes the wound will seal itself, and the vines nearby will send out roots. So then I get a big mound of soil and I put it over the wound, and I hope that the plant can send out new roots and recuperate. So that's a problem. Beetles, cucumber beetles are also a problem. There's spotted ones, there's striped ones, and I often notice them in the flowers. That's where I see them. The thing about these beetles is that they spread it bacteria on their mouth, and they spread it from plant to plant, and that bacteria plugs up the flow of water in the vine, and we call it bacterial wilt. And there's no cure for this. So in this case, what I do is I just pull out the plant and get that bacteria out of the garden before the beetles spread it. So what I do is, again, I always monitor, spend time in your planting, and as soon as I see a few cucumber beetles out there, I get out there and I'll spray it one time with an insecticide. And there are safe insecticides out there like spinosad, and I'll spray in the evening hour when the bees aren't active, and that usually controls that population of beetles if I get it early in the season. Okay. What about bunny rabbits? Wow, bunny rabbits they are not fluffy, they are evil. And so usually when it comes to bunny rabbits and other major pests, I think about the permanent solution. The best way to kill any pest, the best way to manage a pest is to just plain kill it. But with bunny rabbits, I think, they're not interested in winter squash or summer squash because of those spines. And so I just drop my weapon and I let the bunny rabbits alone and let them go to the neighbor's lettuce. That's fine with me. So we don't have to worry about bunnies and deer in our squash patch. Harvesting for summer squash, I want to harvest early. That's the key. Like for that zucchini, I don't want that thing getting more 8 inches long. I want to harvest early and as often as I can, and that will help promote more fruit development too. I don't want those seeds to develop and then it gets kind of hard, fibrous. So harvest early with summer squash. For winter squash, it's a little bit more tricky. What I look to see when a winter squash is ripe, if you look at the bottom of the fruit, it'll have a golden mark on it instead of a greenish mark. It'll turn gold when it's ripe. The rind will be glossy and hard. You won't be able to pierce it with your thumbnail. And then also I look at the stem. I want the stem to be dry. All this helps me to determine if that squash is right. For my case, I'm kind of an easygoing, lazy gardener, and so I just wait. I know my fruits can tolerate a light frost of 32, but they cannot tolerate a hard 28-degree killing frost. So I just wait until a hard frost is expected. And then that day I go out and I harvest all my winter squash. And that it doesn't really harm winter squash to stay on the vine a week or two extra. And that way I can get my harvest done all at one time before a hard frost comes. I use a pruner to clip I want to keep about 1 inch of stem on. I'll brush off the soil from the fruit. I don't wash the fruits. Washing the fruits can lead to bacteria infection. And then I want to harden the shell by curing it in a warm, sunny place for about a week. And so what I do is I put all my harvests in the garage for that cold night. And then usually when that cold spell's over, I'll take them out onto the driveway or on a porch and where it gets as much sun as possible. And I'll keep them out there for about a week. And that way you'll get a hard shell. Then the last thing as far as storing the winter squash, a lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of types of winter squash will get much better tasting in storage. The starches turn into sugars. So I put mine in an unheated basement and that does well. Now, some types don't really benefit much from this extra curing, like acorn delicata and spaghetti squash. You don't have to cure it, but I won't eat a buttercup or a kabocha squash for at least a month after it's stored, and butternut likes at least 2 months before it reaches its peak flavor. Okay, so there you go. Enjoy, and I welcome any questions. I hope you have. I'm sure you're going to have success. You know, North Dakota is made to grow squash. And again, try. Invite you to explore all the different types of squashes out there. Find one that you love and then enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Sure.
You have lots of questions, but
Good.
first I have a little announcement. We have a lot of squash and zucchini recipes, including lots of favorites, and we have a Growing Together community cookbook, and a lot of those were contributed by our local gardeners in the Fargo area. And in fact, I'm featuring butternut squash bake in my column this week, so we can post those things along with your sources that you provided. So here are some comments and questions. Some are
Okay.
just cute comments. Um, I love winter squash like spaghetti and buttercup. However, after shoulder injuries and maybe not the correct knives, I cannot cut it open. Do I need one of those mini chainsaws? How do you open up these things?
Yeah, that's a problem. Um, you know, I just get a big knife. But I know some of our growers use like a hatchet. They literally use a hatchet to, or I guess a mini. I never heard of a mini chainsaw, but whatever gets the job done. And that's just the way it goes. I don't know of any special kitchen tool for that.
No,
Maybe
just a
somebody else
really
knows.
good knife.
Yeah,
Really good knife.
find a strong friend.
Couple comments rolling in. Nuke them a few minutes and that'll soften the skin. So you can try
Okay, there you
that.
go.
There we go. We're all helping each other. Another comment. I love winter squash. Oh, that's the same one. Are all winter squash climacteric fruit? They continue to ripen off the vine.
Uh, yeah, yeah, I think like yeah. That's same with pumpkins too. Pumpkins will ripen off the vine too. So yeah, sure. To a certain degree, of course, but then they reach their full maturity. Especially like winter squash is already mature when you harvest it, so it's got a limitation before it rots. Yeah, but
Right.
it does change off the vine. That is definitely true. Like we said with the butternut squash, you don't want to eat it right away. You want to let it sit for a couple months.
All right. Next question that came in. Do you find that young squash plants benefit from protection from the wind?
Yeah, of course, North Dakota wind. Yep. If possible, yeah, anything you can do to protect against the wind, that's great. A sheltered, any type of sheltered place in general is, these plants aren't, stones. They're delicate plants, so they benefit from some protection. You want to harden them off, before you transplant them, for get them used to the outdoors a little bit. And if it's in a really windy spot, you could put some type of protection there, or some people put a roll of burlap across the garden on that windy side to stop it. Some
And
people use a row of some of our growers in the past use some willows to help shield against it.
so more comments about opening up these squash are rolling in. Someone uses a chef's knife and a rubber mallet to pound the knife into the squash. So there you go. Microwave, bake, use a rubber mallet and a sharp knife. Don't hurt yourself. You could really cut yourself badly with
Wow.
opening up one of these. Um, Someone wants to know, can we get those row spacings adjusted for square foot gardens or pots?
Okay. That's square foot gardening and squash just aren't the best of friends. I see like the square foot garden manual, and it talks about, they say they allow 2 square feet per plant. That's just ridiculous. There's no way you can grow a squash plant in 2 feet. So you just gotta put it on the edge of my raised bed and let the vine trellis away from it. Yeah. And also get bush type vines. So that's another priority of breeders, is finding some plants that have a more restricted vine.
And someone just asked about the planting chart. You will all have access to Tom's complete presentation. In fact, I believe it's already up on the Field to Fork website, so you can go back and review anything you missed. How do you control pests? Squash bugs are an issue where I live.
Okay, what I want to do is, first thing is, I want to monitor for the pest, and then once I find my enemy, then I want to be aggressive in getting it before it spreads aggressively. So what are we going to do? Nowadays we're very fortunate. There's been a lot of botanical insecticides that are available that are remarkably safe and short-lived in the environment. So again, I mentioned spinosad. That's a pretty powerful one that will give us at least a few days of protection, and it will kill fairly quickly. Neem is another tool that we have. Um, I think those are the best two. And there's insecticidal soap, but you have to spray the bug itself, so that gets a little bit difficult. Um, and if it really gets bad, then I would use a conventional type, like there's the 7, the Garden Tech 7 now, and that's very powerful. But so you got to be careful when you use that and follow instructions. The nice thing about especially for a winter squash, is the bugs are going to be, we're spraying them in the summer, and we're not going to have to harvest until the fall. So there's not going to be residue on that insecticide at that time. I really think the key is to get on it early.
All right, and a couple more comments about opening up the squash.
Wow,
One, throw it on the sidewalk and let it chatter.
really?
I haven't tried that.
I thought that's how they got the name squash. You would have to step on and
Probably.
squash it.
I
But
bet.
according to the Library of Congress, that's not how it got its name.
Next question is about zucchini.
Good.
Do zucchini squash plants need more than one to produce?
No, what you'll see in a squash plant is that you'll see a squash plant will have both male and female flowers. The female flowers have a baby squash attached to it. The male flowers do not. So you just got to make sure you have men and female flowers on the same plant, and they'll be there. So, all you need is one plant.
Good to know. You definitely don't want to, or you'll have a lot of
See,
squash.
there you go again. Nobody respects zucchini. I told you it's in the Hall of Fame, and you're just like the hunger-free garden people who are going to say they're going to allow one zucchini per county. Just no respect.
Next question. What do you look for when you're buying squash at a supermarket or a farmer's market? How can you tell how fresh it is?
Well, if it's at farmers market, it's got it. I don't think freshness is so key for a winter squash. But I just want to I want to look for that golden spot that helps me in the dry stem. That encourages me to know that it's a mature squash. For for summer squash, just use your common sense. You want it to be firm, not rubbery. Ask the grower. But I look
Exactly.
for firmness with summer squash. I don't know, Julie, how do you do it? I never have to go to farmer's market for squash.
Well, there are certain attributes that you look for. You certainly don't want cuts or bruises or those sorts of things, characteristic color. On our Field to Fork site, I believe you and I wrote it together, Tom. There's one about squash and there's a separate one about summer squash. So we do have a couple handouts that talk about growing, picking, preserving, and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot more information out there for all of you if you just do a little searching for our free information.
Yeah,
Someone wants to know about sweet dumpling winter squash.
there
Did
you
you
go.
talk about those?
Yep, sweet dumpling is a type of a delicata squash. And instead of being like a boat shape, a sweet dumpling is more like an acorn squash with light green with green spotting. Sweet dumpling is very popular because it's early and it is sweet and it cooks up easily. Some of the varieties have a hard shell though, but it's a nice one. It's a delicata squash. It's definitely worth a try. We've had more success. If I had to pick a delicata squash, the one I would pick is Bush Delicata. That's been our most popular one. It's early and it has a bush vine, so it won't take over the garden, and it resists powdery mildew. Again, that's so I won't buy a squash variety that doesn't resist powdery mildew.
We've had a couple questions come in about squash and crossbreeding if you
Okay,
plant them too closely. Any comments?
sure. Okay, so that's a I get that question often, and okay, you have to have the same species of squashes to pollinate each other. Now, so butternut squash, let's see, even if I hold on here. Here we go. I was kind of anticipating this could be a question, but it was kind of scientific answer, so I didn't want to get too scientific. But let's say you have a butternut squash that's Cucurbita moschata. It won't cross with anything else. But let's say it's a Cucurbita pepo, an acorn squash, delicata squash, spaghetti, summer squash like zucchini, and most pumpkins will cross with each other. Okay. So what happens? Let's say I grow an acorn squash on one side next to a jack-o'-lantern. Now, can I grow them side by side? They will pollinate each other. But what happens is the fruit that's formed is maternal tissue only. So my row of acorns, the fruits are maternal tissue. They're not influenced by the pollen. So all my row of acorns is going to be 100% acorns. All my jack-o'-lantern the row is going to be all jack-o'-lanterns. But the problem we got is the seed inside of our acorn and our jack-o'-lantern. If they cross-pollinate one another, like my acorn inside, that seed is half acorn and half jack-o'-lantern. So the seed becomes a problem. So this really is only a problem with people who say seed. Excuse me. So, so that's why you got to be really tricky saving seed for these crops. You have to isolate your specific type about at least 300 and more like 800 feet from another type of squash. So, but it's not a problem this year. It's only if you save the seed that's influenced by being pollinated by a different type of squash. Okay. So I can grow out. That's why if I grow a white pumpkin variety next to an orange pumpkin variety, the orange will stay orange, the white will stay white. But the next year, the seed inside will be something, uncontrollable.
Interesting.
You know,
Can you get them to be striped? Orange and white?
uh, yes, there are ornamental. Again, get these seed catalogs, Julie. It's amazing that there's ornamental varieties of that are white with stripes, with ones with like black tops, ones with warts, all different shades of colors, all mixtures, and there's gourds too that are all crazy things. So there's amazing variety of decorative squashes out there today.
So how long can a winter squash be stored in the proper conditions? How long can you get yours to last?
Okay, it depends on the type of squash. Like if it's a delicata or acorn squash, I'm going to try to get a couple months out of that. On the other hand, if it's a butternut squash, I'm going to strive for 6 months, or a kabocha, 6 months.
Just a cool, dark,
Cool
dry
conditions,
place.
dry conditions, and I like to get it off the floor, like put it on a pallet so it doesn't sit on a cold floor. So a little bit of dry, airy conditions. Yep, I'll get the job done.
And I'm just going to encourage everybody to eat more squash because it's an excellent source of vitamin A from all the carotenoids. So those dark orange, really good for you. Can fight all sorts of disease. Okay, back to questions for Tom. How important are the secondary roots at the nodes to squash plants?
Okay, it depends. It depends how strong the primary roots are. Okay, how about that for an answer? Uh, Secondary roots are more important if the primary roots have been damaged for whatever reason due to cultivation. But in general, those roots that grow along the side of the vine aren't that critical.
Um, do you have any names of insecticides for squash borer?
Yes. Okay, I love that spinosad. And then since the boar is a caterpillar, true caterpillar, we can use Bacillus thuringiensis, like dipel or thuricide with a T. That will do the job. Neem, and of course, the 7 gets the job done really effectively.
Right.
You can
It,
if it's squash vine borer is a problem, rotation can help, and also you can try to set out some traps. There's squash vine borer traps. A homemade trap would be a bright yellow bowl with some soapy water inside. That could be used to monitor for the presence of them. A yellow bowl with water, soapy water inside.
your next question about Turk's turban. Is that an
Okay.
edible gourd?
I'm going to say, yeah, I think it's very comparable to a buttercup or a kabocha squash, and I believe it's edible. But I don't think it's not popular for eating. So I would take that for, hmm,
For your
I think you can do better.
centerpiece?
Exactly. I mean, like, you're not going to die from it, if that's the question. But there's just not, I don't think that, I haven't really cut open in one. I don't think there's much flesh there, but it's beautiful. Orange
And and
color.
this is just a comment for everyone based on someone's experience. Bush type summer squash work great in containers. I've been growing them that way for years. And this person likes one called the cube of butter.
Hey,
I've not seen that. On another comment, getting back to cooking squash, I believe you can cook one whole in a pressure cooker. No need to cut it open. I have not tried that. If you want to experiment with your pressure cooker, this person suggested a cup of water. So there you go. That's your experiment. Don't blow it up. Someone wants to know about ball zucchini. Are they harder to grow?
Okay, those globular zucchini, no, they're easy to grow. They're just, just a different shape. They're not that popular because they're just not much there. And you got to harvest them young. That's really the key for zucchini and summer squash in general. You got to harvest them very young. Same way like that, like those starship, those scallop squashes. Again, they're easy to grow, and but you got to harvest them when they're just like a few inches across. You got to harvest them young. But I've never heard of a hard to grow zucchini.
Just three more questions and then we'll call it a day and we'll let you go and have a cup of coffee or something. Is zucchini yellow mosaic virus a growing issue? Can you eat squash with this virus?
Okay. Um, Sometimes we see this these kind of viruses also, especially on crookneck squash. We see it. A lot of times this comes from the seed itself. Okay, so the seed, it came with the seed to begin with, and some varieties are just naturally susceptible to it. Um, so whenever I see a mosaic virus, I don't blame myself. It probably what came with the seed to begin with, and it is edible. These viruses that cause unusual streaking and bumps on zucchini, it still is edible, but sometimes it has an off flavor to it. And usually for me, it's usually the harvest is so abundant, I just don't bother eating it.
And two more questions. Do you suggest trying to police the leaves for bugs' eggs, or is it too late by then?
You mean like the bugs, like for a squash vine borer? Is that what we're talking about? The leaves of the plant?
Yeah.
It, that'll be down at the stem is where that will be. And it's always a good idea to spend time in your garden and monitor for the presence of eggs or the first swarm of insect pests in our garden. So it's never too late to be policing. And then again, once the good gardeners spend time in their garden, and then they can see those eggs sometimes, and then you can take action immediately. So if you see the eggs, definitely you can spray them, and that'll be the end of them.
And one last question, and I'll make a comment before I ask this. We've had a couple questions about where they can see the archives. So on the Field to Fork website, we have all the archives actually from the last 10 years of doing these webinars. So you can go back and watch us age, right, Tom?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, not you, just me. Here's your final question. And I don't even know if I can pronounce this $100 word. Are there any parthenocarpic cultivars of zucchini?
Yes, definitely. And again, this is another trend that we're seeing, and especially for like high tunnel production. Yep, this is a trend now. And oh, what am I thinking? I think Dunja, Dunja. I would look for that one. I think that's parthenocarpic. Um, that's the one that came out recently. But you can go to a catalog and then look for ones that are made to grow in greenhouses. They'll be parthenocarpic, which means that they don't need pollination from bees. And also this holds true. There's cucumbers now that have this feature as well. So yep, anything, and so they're out there. Yep, it's a new trend.
Very good. Well,
You're
we
not
have
going to find
reached.
it at a garden center. You're not going to find it at a garden center. You got to go online. You got to go get your seed catalogs.
All right. Well, I want to thank Tom for his great talk and all of you for participating. I hope you continue to participate. We have a lot more webinars coming up. So thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody, and see you next week.